Good afternoon. I just want to welcome you to this session, the Scholarship of Engagement, and welcome our speaker, Andy Furco, who's going to grace us with another wonderful conversation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you all for spending another hour, 15 minutes or so with me this afternoon. This issue of engaged scholarship and the scholarship of engagement is a very important part of being able to institutionalize and advance community engagement in higher education. It's a very important part of the work that faculty do, and it's an important part of what's going to ultimately decide whether faculty will engage in the work. Faculty, as you know, are very pressured by their disciplines and their institutions to do certain kinds of work, and sometimes engaged scholarship is not on the radar or is not seen as the kind of work the faculty should be engaged in. And so I'd like to spend a little bit of time today talking about exactly what we mean by engaged scholarship, maybe dispelling some of the misconceptions about what it is and also what it is not. I'd like to then take us through an experience of a colleague of mine at the University of Minnesota who was just promoted to associate professor with tenure, who is an engaged scholar, and he shared some of his experience with me, and I think it was very enlightening, and I like to share it with you to give you a sense of some of the issues that come up with faculty who do this work. Then I want to talk a little bit about the criteria for how do we present this work in our scholarly work. How do we, part of what happens is that we don't know how to talk about this work. And so there's a set of criteria that I'd like for us to review as a group to look at how can we make this work, present this work in a way that's going to be helpful to us as scholars and as engaged scholars. And then share with you just some publication venues and outlets that do publish engaged scholarly work. And of course, any resources that we might might be available that you might tap into. So that's it. And of course, this is meant to be an open discussion. We are taping this, so if you are going to make some comments, I ask that there's a microphone in the back. So I ask that if you're going to make some comments that you speak into the microphone so that we can get recorded, so I don't have to try to interpret what you said, and I'm not always very good at that. So engaged scholarship. Engaged scholarship has connotes a number of things to people, and people who don't know what it is tend to see it as sort of a fringe kind of scholarship. And in many ways, there's really a myth around this. And one of the myths is that, or a common perception, is that it's a lesser form of scholarship. That engaged scholarship is not as rigorous and basically, therefore, is not as good as traditional scholarship. And the fact of the matter is that that's not true. In fact, engaged scholarship is a more challenging form of scholarship that meets the rigors of traditional scholarship and extends them. And faculty who are junior faculty, assistant professors who come up for tenure or who are interested in doing this work are sometimes discouraged from doing it because they are told that you won't get tenure if you do this work. You won't get promoted if you do this work. I was told when I was doing community-based research in the early 1990s, a time when this wasn't even very popular, I was told I'd never get a job. So I think one of the things that we have to be able to do is, partly because the people who were working with me didn't understand what this work was. And so the more that we can get a better understanding of what it is, I think we can begin to realize that this is a very rigorous, very important strategy for research and scholarship. So what is engaged scholarship? Well, let's look at how it compares to traditional scholarship. I think that's a good way to start. So traditional scholarship. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see that. Traditional scholarship, you should have a handout of the PowerPoint there, hopefully. Traditional scholarship, I don't know if you can see that any better. Traditional scholarship is, has to break new ground in the discipline, right? This is a standard of traditional scholarship. Your work has to break new ground in the discipline. You have to discover new things in your discipline that are going to make a difference. You need to answer significant questions in your discipline. Okay, so questions that are important that will advance your discipline. You can't just do a study on anything in your discipline. It has to answer these significant questions, right? And the more breakthroughs you have, the more discoveries you have in your discipline, the better scholar you're perceived to be. And is viewed and validated by qualified peers in the discipline. This is what we call peer review, that the other people, other specialists, other scholars in the field who do this work say that your work is great and terrific and valid and significant. Right? So this is what traditional scholarship, you have to meet these standards if you want to be advanced. So how does engaged scholarship compare? Well, engaged scholarship has to break new ground in the discipline. There's no difference in that. So if your discipline is chemistry and you're doing engaged work, you have to break new ground in chemistry. But you also have to show that it has direct application or implications to broader public issues. So it's not just breaking new ground in your discipline, but it's also showing that this work that you're doing also has value and application to the broader society. Okay. So you're not reducing any standard there. You also have to answer significant question in the discipline which have relevance to public or community issues. So here's where the intention behind the work is a bit different. But you still have to answer significant question in your discipline. It's just that that question you're asking also has explicit relevance to community issues. Okay. Is reviewed and validated by qualified peers in your discipline, but also in the community. So it's not just people in your discipline saying, your scholars in your discipline saying this is really quality work and significant, but those for whom this has relevance are also saying, yes, this is important work, this is significant work. Right. So we're not lowering any standards here. Okay, traditional scholarship also is based on theoretical frameworks, uses appropriate methods. Different disciplines have different methods that are appropriate. In anthropology, you have more ethnographies, for example. Is disseminated to appropriate audiences, and usually that's in scholars in your field through peer review journals, et cetera, and make significant advances in the knowledge and understanding of the discipline. Okay? So that's where your peer review and your enhancement in scholarship becomes important for your discipline. Engaged scholarship also solid theoretical and practical basis. So you have to say, this is not just a great theory, but this is how this theory can be applied and used and how it's important. Right. Also has appropriate investigative methods, is disseminated appropriate audiences, understanding of the discipline and public social issues, and applies the knowledge to the social issues. So you're making an explicit connection of what you've discovered to a socially relevant issue. So it's not a lesser form of scholarship. You have to meet all of the standards of traditional scholarship to be able to do engaged scholarship. This is also to say that not all engaged research is scholarly. You can do community-engaged research, but if you're not breaking ground in your discipline, you're not having it validated by qualified peers in the discipline, you're not using appropriate methods in your discipline, you are not doing engaged scholarship. You're doing community-engaged research. Okay? So engaged scholarship is where you're meeting these standards of what's appropriate for the discipline, but also is having some relevance to social issues, and the community is involved in being a peer reviewer of your work, giving feedback to say this is important. You have any questions about that? No, you're awfully quiet. Okay. All right. So the next slide is basically a definition. I won't go through it. It's basically saying the same thing. Yes, Miriam, we need you to talk into the microphone, please, if that's a possibility. Thank you.
Maybe you're about to answer this question, Andy.
No, I don't think that's on. Oh, go ahead. I can repeat it if you need to.
I think maybe you are about to answer this question, but you just said that traditional scholarship versus scholarship of engagement. And on this side, you're just doing research based in the community. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between scholarship and research?
Certainly. Scholarship can also be around teaching, right? Scholarship has to do with advancing, being an expert within a discipline or set of disciplines, where you are developing new thinking, new ideas, new discoveries, and you are advancing the field through those new ideas and new discoveries. So you're doing work that's new and cutting edge and innovative and is helping to move thinking forward. Okay, that makes it, that's one important, those are important components of scholarly work. And then with that comes a whole set of principles and methods that go along with doing scholarly research within different disciplines. So different disciplines ascribe to different kinds of methods, for example. Different kinds of pedagogies in teaching may be appropriate. And so if you're discovering new ways to teach engineering, for example, you can make that a scholarly endeavor by studying it, doing it in a way where you're systematically collecting information, you're looking at it in a systematic way with the norms within the principles that are in the discipline, and then you're going to talk about it in a way that your field can understand to say, this is a new way of thinking about X. Okay, so it's about moving the field forward. Does that help?
Yes. I mean, yeah. I was.
You want to talk in the microphone, please? No. Oh, sorry.
I guess I was looking at the difference between research versus scholarship, and I think that the way you responded is very much the way Boyer would respond, that the research is what we do to get to the scholarship. So, so I think that's how I understood it, and it answered my question.
Right.
Anybody else?
Right. Right. Part of it's expanding our horizons and understandings about topics and issues and disciplines. And the research is a process. So you can do research and not discover anything and not advance anything. You can be doing research, but that doesn't mean you're doing scholarly work. Right? Okay. Sure. Okay. So, all right. So you have a definition here. Now, one of the things that happens when we work at institutions of higher education especially is that we have scholars from different disciplines. And there are different levels of engagement that are appropriate or not appropriate in different disciplines. We have a lot of debates in this field about how engaged we need to be with the community. Some say unless the community is defining the questions and is part of the whole process of the research and scholarly endeavor, then it's not community-engaged research, it's community-based research. Others say, well, if we're taking a more objective stance on an issue, we can't engage those necessarily in identifying what the issues are because it's going to bias our research. It's going to bias our method. And therefore, we have to engage or partner with the community in a different way. So what I like to posit to you is that there are levels of engagement. Right? And some levels are more appropriate than others. This is all part of a set of paradigms for research. Now, I don't want to get too into research paradigms with you, but I think one of the things I want to mention is that people ascribe, different disciplines and different researchers, even within disciplines, ascribe to different paradigms of research. One being a very positivistic, what we call positivistic paradigm research, most of you know this, where we take a much more objective stance on an issue, that there's a single truth, everything's empirical, so the data tell us what the data say is what it is. Okay, so data say X, then it's X. And we interpret what that X might mean based on looking at that data. Right, which is a little different than more interpretive kind of research, where we actually tie the context to some of the data to better understand the data, help us better understand the data. So by saying if we're in this context, the data may be interpreted this way. But if we go to this context, the data may mean something different and may be interpreted differently. So we want to connect with the context to help us better interpret the data, and that's an interpretist approach. And then there's a critical approach, which is that the data are only meaningful to those from whom the data emerge. In other words, those who provide the information, the subjects, the participants, are the ones who know best about what they mean when they give us information. So we can ask them on a survey with the Likert scale, and if they say 5, we look at that 5 and we interpret that. Or we may actually say, well, what did you mean when you said strongly agree? And then they interpret that and they provide us information in a way that enlightens us on what that 5 really means. Okay, that's a critical approach. And different disciplines and specializations within different disciplines will ascribe to different paradigms of research. And those invite different levels of engagement. Right? A positivistic kind of approach makes it a little bit more difficult to do fully engaged participatory, community-based participatory action research. It's a little more difficult to do that. It's not impossible, but it's much, much more difficult. Right, so if you look at this from sort of less engaged to more engaged, I'm not implying that one's better than the other. It's just that there are levels of how much we involve the community and our partners in this as researchers. So we could do research in the public interest, which might be as far as we can go, meaning that I'm going to, rather than studying an issue just on my discipline, I'm going to think about what that issue, the implication of that issue for the public, and I'm going to study it with the public interest in mind. And that's one way to become a little bit more engaged. Right? Or I can become more community focused, which means I'm going to look at what issue is happening in the community, and I'm going to take that issue and inform how I shape my question. Okay, so I'm having the community inform me on how I'm going to shape my research. Or I can do community-based research where I'm going to go into the community and I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to learn about the context of the community a bit to help inform my research. Or I can do community-based participatory research, which is I'm going to invite those whom might benefit or might give me information or might be part of this research enterprise and engage them in the research by asking them either to help me define the question or to help me interpret the instruments. Are these good instruments? Do these make sense to you? Or to help me with the data interpretation. Here's how I'm interpreting this data. Would you interpret in the same way? Or to help me come up with conclusions. Or community-based participatory action research, known as PAR, where the goal is not just to produce journal articles that for my discipline, but I'm actually going to make some change in the community. So the conclusions include a set of recommendations for action and for change. Or the research is about studying the action, includes the action and the change, and the impact that that action and change had. So I develop a theory saying if you approach this situation in this way, we test that out, we see if it worked, and then we come back and say it worked or didn't work. So that's a whole process. And the community is involved in that whole endeavor. Right? So there are levels of engagement. Okay, so people right away say, I don't do that kind of research. This is what some faculty said to me. Oh, participatory action research. I don't do that kind of research. So I'm not doing engaged scholarship. I don't want to do engaged scholarship. And I'm saying, well, being an engaged scholar, actually, you can work along this continuum. Right? This is very, very important. Do you have any questions about that or comments or? Really very quiet. Okay. Yes, okay. A microphone, please. Phil Donahue. Some people are too young to remember Phil Donahue.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we started working on a NIH grant, and it was a community-based participatory research, or you actually could say action research, because the goal is to change policy. But all of the feedback that came from the reviewers was, well, this isn't good, solid research, and
Not good science.
everything that the feedback was, to go to much more strict science that didn't involve the community, because that would bias too many things. And, even though the NIH is now saying that they're looking for community-based participatory research, they haven't made the functional shift yet to actually fund it.
No, you're right. And I would say that NIH, it's National Institutes of Health, which funds a lot of the health-related research. I think they're less inclined to look at participatory action research and community-based participatory research. They're more interested in like community-based research or even community-focused research. So I'll give you an example. So a group of researchers, medical doctors, want to study, they think, well, one important disease is prostate cancer. We want to look at prostate cancer and do a research NIH study on prostate cancer. And they say the reason is because, and here's a community we want to focus on and look at this community and incidence of prostate cancer, what might cause it, and what if it's higher or lower levels, and perhaps why or why not. So they might propose this, saying this is an important issue. Then they go in the community, and the community members say, well, you know what? That's great, but we're not interested in prostate cancer. We want to do diabetes and nutrition, and we want to look at that because that's more important to us. Okay? So having a community-based approach may be that now the medical doctors say, oh, I want to change our focus because the community has other issues they consider important. That's not necessarily involving the community in the research enterprise, but it's helping them formulate the question. So that would be more community-based. And that's probably as far as NIH goes. The other place where NIH comes into play is translational research. They're very big on translational research, meaning you do your research study, and then you publish this technical paper in your peer-reviewed Journal of American Medical, Journal American, that JAMA. And but no one understands it because you have to be a medical MD and a PhD to understand it. And so how do you take that valuable information and put it in ways that allow those who might benefit to understand it? So they're very much into what steps you're going to take to do translational research. And this is where you might engage with the community and say, here's the information, how do we produce it in a way that's going to be helpful? So they're not really involved in the research enterprise. Right? They come into it at different points. Whereas community-based participatory research and action research, they're actually part of the research, and they're saying this is a bad instrument, or here's how I interpret the information. So it's different. It's a bit different. Okay. Yes. Microphone.
Thanks. So with the translational research or the translational process after an academic research project, is that service or is that actually research? Does that show up on that spectrum there?
Excellent. Great segue into the next. We didn't plan this, believe me. So this is one of the issues. How do you count it? What does it look like? All right. So I'm part of this group called the Research Universities Community Engagement Network. The Research Universities Community Engagement Network, otherwise known as Truckin'. Okay? We debate whether it's Trucin or Truckin'. And I think it should be Trucin. I said, we've been rivals for so long, let's put down our gauntlets and call it Trucin. No, but it's Truckin', because they think keep on trucking. So this Truckin' group, one of my tasks was to interview a recently tenured, because promotion, tenure, and getting faculty to really think they have that it's one thing to come in as an assistant professor without tenure and be told, oh yeah, we value this work, it's great, you do it. Another thing to say, okay, I'm going to have to get reviewed by people in my discipline and outside my discipline. Do I take this risk? Right? And there is a pecking order in departments. The weak scholars and the strong scholars, and you want to be, with the strong scholars because it does affect your reputation. So it gets very risky. And so one of my tasks was to interview a recently tenured professor who does engage scholarship and have him talk about his experience. So I'd like to share some of his findings with you. his thoughts with you. So I asked him a few things. So I'm going to walk down these questions and his responses with you. One of the things I asked him was, what motivated you to do this work? So one of the things that came out was he's a public historian. He's a history professor. He worked in museums for a while, wanted to study public history, getting his PhD, but he was told, don't do public history. You'll never get a job. Hello, right? Do academic history. That's really important. So he said, okay. So he did his academic history, got his PhD, came to the University of Minnesota as an assistant professor, but he kept wanting to do public history, and the Twin Cities being a vibrant place where there's a lot of opportunities for that, he was still engaged, but academically he did his scholarly work around academic history. So, but he felt that the work that he began to teach some courses that were focused on public history at the undergraduate level, and felt that this was really important part of his experience, what he wanted to learn, and that the students were getting a lot out of that experience. All right. So then he basically talked about how the reason he had to kind of do this sort of under the radar was because public history, there's this two-tiered system of academic versus public parts of the discipline. So in sociology, we have public sociology, and then we have the real sociologists, right? We have this in a couple of disciplines. And so, because it's like basic versus applied research, or you do applied research? Oh no, we do basic research, it's sort of the same kind of tier. So he always felt like he had to keep it under the radar, which was very interesting. But he did it because he was passionate about it. He saw it important for his students, and this is what he really liked to do. Then we asked him, what are some of the barriers to your appointment and promotion? And he started to say exactly what you pointed out, is how to get this work counted as part of one's research or teaching. So in your portfolio as faculty members, you're asked to talk about your research, talk about your teaching, and talk about your public service. And he was saying when he went up to put his portfolio together, he put it under his teaching. He said that this is innovative teaching. I'm engaging my students in service learning in innovative ways, and this is part of teaching. They said, no, you should put this under public service. This is not teaching or research. And so it really brought up the issue of how do you count this? And it's this old paradigm of what this looks like. And this was a big hindrance for him. And he said it took him a long time to convince his department that his academic history department, that this public work he was doing was scholarly, and it was advancing the field, and it was tied to his research, and it was tied to his teaching in terms of doing scholarly research and scholarly teaching work. And he said that was a very important thing he had to work very, very hard on. The other thing I asked him is, what do you believe there were critical credentials that are required? And he talked a lot about the fact he wasn't hired to do public scholarship, and they kept putting that on him. But he's talked about the importance of having products, of having demonstrations that do meet the standards of quality, whether it's peer-reviewed kinds of things. So basically, the message he said was, I had to do the academic history work in the scholarly vein that's accepted, and I could do my public scholarship. He says, I would not have been promoted had I only done public scholarly work. Okay? That's because of the culture of his department. You have this academic. So the message this has in terms of engaged scholarship is you can't just say, I don't care. I'm just going to do this engaged scholarship, come what may, because you're probably not going to be there for a long time. You have to kind of play the game. You have to kind of fit the norm, because others are not as far advanced in understanding this work. And this is a key and important part, which I thought was very good. And he said, I had to publish in those top-tier review journals because that's what gets counted. I don't know how many of you have been through this process of promotion tenure, and I mean some are better than others, but I've been in tenure review committees where they say they count the journals and which if they're top tier or not, and based on that, that's what counts. And and they're a pretty good teacher, and they've done some service, right? Like I don't know anyone, at least in the institutions I've worked with, that have been promoted that have been outstanding teachers and not great researchers. Right? But you might be a great researcher and okay teacher, you might actually fare pretty well. So so you have to understand that, be able to work with it while trying to push the envelope a bit. Critique or advocacy received by faculty colleagues and community members. One of the things he talked about was graduate students. Now, talking about the next generation of scholars and how we prepare our next generation of scholars, how he and I and others have sort of been pushed away from this, right? Here is a group of graduate students who wanted to have a course, they said, look, we want to go into public history and we want to do this public scholarly work. Can you teach a course? And he said, okay, I'll develop a course. So he went to his department, said, I want to develop this course on public history for our graduate students. They said no, because we want to prepare our students to be able to get jobs after they graduate as faculty members. And if we prepare them in this way, they're not going to be in a good position to get academic positions. Now, if you know about rankings of institutions of higher education, especially research universities, one of the criterion for your ranking is where your graduates get placed. Your PhD students get placed, right? So if your PhD students are now at a disadvantage of getting placed at Harvard and all those institutions, then your rankings will go down, right? So there's this whole cultural thing that's entrenched, that's very, very difficult to break, that makes it difficult to do this engaged scholarship work, which I think we want to say thank you to those who are very brave, who go out and want to do this. So he talked about the fact that he basically had to teach this course in overload and just do it on his own time because he really cared about it. If you had to do it over again, what would you definitely do differently? He said, first of all, he said he would do it earlier. He wouldn't be afraid. He said he would have tried to do this work less in isolation, try to find others who were engaged scholars in doing this work and try to band together with them. He realized there were a lot of other faculty who were feeling the same way in other disciplines. And if he could have connected with them sooner, he would have been more motivated. And now as a tenured professor, he's working to really try to break some of these barriers down and provide some leadership around it, which I think is pretty great. But he said for him it was teaching that was the linchpin for allowing him to then be able to create this work as innovative teaching work, that he had to couch it that way. It can't be service. It can't be looked at as service. Do you believe community engagement is helpful in hindering gardening success and gardening promotion? He says it ultimately helped him get promotion because it opened him up to new ideas and new thinking about his research, and it helped him change the way he taught. So he said he became a better educator and a better researcher because of his community engagement, ironically. Right? So in some ways, we have to think about the value that this has for scholarship in general. And then advice to junior faculty members is you have to play the game. You have to be strong about it, do the work, but also think about what the requirements are to be successful at the institution and fulfill those requirements. And do community engagement in any way that will allow you to say this is good scholarship and this is good teaching. All right. So I thought that his experience was just really enlightening in terms of how faculty who do engage scholarship, we think it's a great thing, we think it's wonderful. Community members say to us, well, why don't more faculty get involved? We have these meetings and no faculty don't show up. Well, because of the fact that it's very risky for some faculty to do this work. And that's where I think we have to be able to understand each other's environments and be able to find ways that institutions of higher education, that's one of the things that I think I'm trying to work on as an administrator, is trying to find ways of helping people understand that engaged scholarship is not a lesser form of scholarship, because that's part of the problem, but also to take a look at those who do this work and say, look at the kind of work that they are doing. Look at how powerful it is. Look at the advancements they've made. And then people could start to say, oh, okay, I get it. That's really very, very key to this. Okay, any questions about that? No, you're really very quiet. Okay. All righty. What else can I tell you about this? There is a a set of criteria. So if you're putting together a portfolio, did we give those out, by the way? That we did. So you should have a portfolio here. What I did was I gave you some criteria. This is from Community Campuses Partnership for Health. They developed a portfolio criteria. These are things to think about when you develop your promotion and tenure portfolio and want to make engaged scholarship visible. One of the things that happens is when we do engage scholarship, we don't know how to present it in a way that says it is indeed scholarly work. We do a lot of description. I worked with this agency and my students did these projects, and we got this grant that allowed us to do this piece, but we don't answer the so what. What were the breakthroughs? What was learned? What were the discoveries? What was the innovation that came out of that? And part of being able to be successful in this is being able to think about the engaged scholarly work and talking about it in ways that show it in scholarly terms. And so these are some criteria to help you to guide you through the different elements, guide us through the different elements of a review portfolio and how we might talk about it and what might count as some evidence or how you might demonstrate some of that evidence. All right, so I wanted to give you this. There are other mechanisms like this, but I thought you might want to have a copy of this, okay? And the other thing I gave you that the CCPH folks did, which I think they've done some really terrific work, is I actually gave you an example of a dossier. They changed the names of the people, the kind of, and showed you an actual dossier of a faculty member who's going up for promotion and tenure, who does engaged work, and how she presented her work. One of the things you will notice, so I think that's coming around. One of the things you will notice is that in her letters, external letters, usually you get letters from professors, others, scholars in your field, right? She got letters from the community members she was working with, right? To say, this is how her work has enhanced the field or enhance the discipline and enhance the work that we do. All right. So this is an example here that I thought for those of you who are trying to figure out how to develop a portfolio can do that. How many of you are faculty members in doing engaged scholar? Okay, just a few of you, right? So for the rest of you, future PhD faculty scholars, you can do this. What else? Go ahead, please.
I just wanted to ask a question, going back to your previous slide. The role of students in helping to inspire faculty to do this kind of work. Where do you see the student voice in this kind of work?
That's a great question, Andrea, and here's the rub. Teaching evaluations have become more important in promotion tenure at all institutions. And sometimes faculty are reticent to do service learning and other community kind of engaged work because their evaluations are going to perhaps suffer because they have less control over the classroom and teaching experience of what their students are going to experience. So if students are going into the community and they have a bad experience, they're going to put it down on their evaluations that it was a horrible experience and a horrible course. And it has a bad reflection on you as a faculty member, right? And so I think when it goes well and students say on their evaluations, and we've seen this was the best course I've taken. It changed my life. It helped me learn about X. It helped me move into the field, makes me want to go into research, or makes me want to go into teaching or as a professional, whatever. Then we do see that on the evaluations, and they do make a big difference in the faculty members' evaluation. But it's risky because a lot of it is out of the control of the faculty members' purview. And that's the challenging piece. When in K-12 schools, teachers were saying, one teacher said to me, well, the teachers my neighbor next door, the teacher who teaches next door, is really mad at me because my class is noisy all the time. as though, the kids have to sit there quietly, and because the kids are engaged in these projects and collaborative things, and they're in and out, and they're doing all these things, and she thinks I have no discipline in my class, So it's sort of like the reflection that this has on you as an instructor, and it's risky, But I think student voices can play a very important role when you have a good experience. I would also say students play a very important role in the kind of position I have as an administrator for public engagement. I get up there and I talk about how important public engagement is, and look at the research, and here are these quadrants, and look at all the stuff we know, and people are like, yeah, you're AVP for engagement. Of course you're going to promote the program, right? But when a student gets up there and says, this is what this program has done for me, the regent pays attention, the president pays attention. Right? It makes a difference. So I think students have a very powerful voice, and I think we underutilize students' voices in this. I also think students sometimes come up with the best ideas for how to do this work. If we just empower students and guide them, say, here are some things we want to accomplish, come up with some ideas and some strategies, they come up with the best ideas. So, yeah. Good question. Other questions? No? Okay, I just have two more things to say. One is faculty say, I can't publish this stuff. This is great, but I got published in peer-reviewed journals, and I can't publish this stuff. Well, the good news is that more of disciplinary journals are publishing engaged research. We're seeing a broadening of that in the top-tier journals, so that's emerging. There are what we call socially relevant journals, like the Journal of Urban Issues, the Journal of Public Affairs, that are peer-reviewed journals that are looking at engaged scholarship, whether it's teaching, research, or other kinds of outreach engagement. There are journals specifically on engagement. The Journal of Engagement and Outreach and University of Georgia, I think I got the name right, Michigan Journal of Community Service Learning, and others that actually publish research on engagement. So what is the effect of engagement on students, on faculty, et cetera. And then education journals also are publishing this work. So there are venues for publications, which I would say this wasn't true 15 years ago. You were hard-pressed to find a journal that would publish these things. So I think we've come a very long way, and this is very good because we're starting to see some movement. And then a couple of things I want to just mention in terms of some resources. Faculty have said, I'm an engaged scholar, I've done this great research and great teaching and some outreach work, but no one in my university, no one in my department knows how to review this work. I did my portfolio like Ann Brooks did here, Professor Ann Brooks, and no one knows how to look at this stuff. They're like, what is this? Where's the science? And so a national review board for the Scholarship of Engagement was established in, I think, 2000 to do external reviews of engaged scholarly portfolios. And these are tenured and faculty members in different disciplines at different institutions who will give an external appraisal of the quality of the Scholarship of Engagement, looking at the criteria we talked about earlier, traditional versus scholarship, to say, are you advancing your discipline? And have you also made difference in the community, right? So they have a whole set of criteria. And there, if you go to National Review Board Scholarship of Engagement, type that in, you'll see the criteria they use to review the portfolios, and they will give an assessment. They have 2 or 3 members of the review board do the portfolio reviews, and then they just say give a recommendation, And so some faculty have found this to be helpful when they don't have any other people to. There's an engagement toolkit that's coming out by this trucking group that's looking at resources about how to document this work, how to talk about it, how to bring it back to people who don't understand this work. So there's great readings and resources and bibliographies, and that'll be out probably in the next 2 months or so. There's a handbook on engagement that Hy Fitzgerald is co-editing. It's a 2-volume handbook on engagement, and looking at all different, he's at Michigan State University, he's a vice provost at Michigan State University, and he's producing this handbook on engagement, looking at community partnerships, student issues, faculty, all sorts of things that I think will help with the scholarship of engagement and understanding what it is. Of course, the Community Campuses Partnership for Health and Community Engaged Scholarship for Health Collaborative, which is a group that's producing all this work. And this is all online that you can just download. So if you look up CCPH, you can get some great things. They also have quadrants and rubrics about how to measure the quality of your partnership. Do you have a good partnership? Is it a strong partnership, sustainable partnership, and other kinds of things that I think could be very useful. For one of the places where we're having trouble is with administrators and deans and department chairs. And so there's a National Engagement Academy sponsored by Virginia Tech University. And I took 2 of my associate deans to it last year. It's a 5-day retreat talking about the role that deans and department chairs and other administrators play in promoting engaged scholarship. Very, very great opportunity. So we're starting to see work being done to try to build some support there. And then there's also this national project funded by FIPSE, the Fund for the Improvement. Did I get that right? Yeah, post-secondary education. It's called the Engaged Scholarship Charrette. I don't know if you've participated in any of this, but it's looking at faculty, junior faculty, and helping them understand how to develop their portfolios and encouraging them, sort of like the faculty member I mentioned to you, how to keep that person who's interested in this work develop his or her scholarly portfolio in a way that's going to allow him or her to be successful. So there are these national initiatives, national projects that are taking place that are really wonderful to see. You know, I've been doing this work now for almost 20 years, and it's just finally all coming to fruition in a way that we never dreamed of. So we're very fortunate to be in a time when this work is beginning to be accepted and looked at, and although there's a lot more scrutiny on it, so we have to ensure the quality as well. So what's on your mind? Yes?
I have a question that goes back to the point that was raised about NIH funding earlier, which is I'm interested in not so much the NIH, but the NSF, and about their funding criteria, especially the new requirement or new criteria for community partnerships. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit to what that consists of. Does that apply to all NSF grants? Is that a new criterion for NSF grants, or is that a separate pool of money? And how does that relate to the new stimulus money that's available?
Oh, yes. That's a good question. I don't know if I can answer it fully. We just had a forum on Tuesday with representatives from NSF, we meaning the University of Minnesota, NSF and NIH that came and talked about the role of community engaged research in NSF and NIH funding. The NSF person talked about, excuse me, talked about the fact that what she often sees in the proposals is great literature reviews, great theoretical frameworks, great methodologies, but not a whole lot of talk about how this is all going to have an impact, sort of the so what question. You know, so this is the study we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and look how rigorous it is, and look how scientific it is. But the question is, so what? After you do the study, what's the importance of it? And the community impact piece, she said, was an important part of being able to articulate that piece of the proposal. And then she talked about the different categories of funding. And she was saying that sometimes with some of the randomized trials, that community engagement is not the place to do the work, except, she said, if it's about the question, the kind of question we want to answer, like I asked earlier about prostate cancer versus, diabetes. But she said in some of the later trials where we talk about sort of moving from bench to bedside, looking at, as we move closer to the bedside, how do we engage the community to think about best facilitators and best practices for how to make that leap and how to bring that research, as I mentioned earlier, more of the translational kinds of things that I mentioned. She also talked about the importance of interdisciplinarity in the research, and that community engagement actually helps facilitate the interdisciplinary components, that faculty and researchers work within their specializations, their fields and areas of specializations, and oftentimes they don't know how to communicate well or don't understand the language of other disciplines or other specializations. And by engaging us on a community issue, sometimes it helps to level the playing field a bit and help to unpack some of that communication in a way that facilitates. I do want to say that the session has been recorded, and it will be online if you want to take a look at that probably in the next 2 weeks or something. So if you go to our Office for Public Engagement website, you could see the whole thing, and I'm certainly not as articulate as she was when in presenting it. But she did make a case, and she said that this is something that NSF really is looking for. Doesn't always make it very explicit, and they're working on trying to make it more explicit so people understand exactly what's needed. So it's not just a token, yeah, we're going to connect with the community and see how they feel, but really do it in a way that's much more intentional and much more important to the overall research enterprise. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Other questions?
That brought up a question that, in my mind, about with the stimulus package in particular.
Oh, the stimulus package.
Yeah, with the new emphasis through the Corporation for National and Community Service having a portion of that funding. Are you aware of how much is being earmarked for Learn and Serve funding?
You know, I was just, our president's office just sent me the stimulus package. The thing's about 420 pages, something like that, seriously. And so I haven't had a chance to look at it. In fact, I just got it like yesterday or the day before. So I haven't had a chance to go through it. I do know there is more money for the National Community Service, much more for service learning, I think more than was expected. AmeriCorps programs, VISTA programs, Senior Corps, RSVP, Conservation Corps. There's also more around the Serve America Act, which is also looking at engaging more young people in service, and there's a high school service learning component with that. So there's a lot that I think we're looking at. It's more about, I think, youth engagement and youth empowerment, youth being anyone under my age or younger. And I'll keep saying that until I'm 90. So it's all about, I think, engaging and mobilizing individuals to participate in their communities as a way to help build a sense of community and in positive ways. So there is money. I don't know exactly how much, but I know it's quite substantial. Yes. A Youth Build, I think, was one of the programs in there, and some others. Yeah.
I've been kind of following that because the SEAs, they give money to the formula funding to the grant, to the state agencies. But it was a big fight to get service learning in there because they were going to give a lot of money to community service. It seemed like they did not have an understanding of what service learning is. And just like your faculty members, not valuing, engaging. And I could tell you it's been a long 2-3 months trying to battle for service learning and trying to educate our representatives the difference between community service and service learning. So I really feel like we need to start marketing ourselves or publishing more or getting more involved. We almost lost some of it too. So I think it's real important that not only we market service learning and make people realize the value of it, but also we need to look at how service learning helps with career development because they're so similar and parallel in what they're trying to do. And we just need to start doing a lot more. Like you said, it's a neat time to be a part of it, but at the same time, there's so many people in the higher levels that determine the funding don't have knowledge of how important service learning is.
I'm really glad you brought that up because that's a very, very important issue. It goes back to misconceptions and perceptions about this work. You know, certainly when we looked at, you know, for most of you know, the service learning enterprise is part of what we call the Corporation for National Service, which is a federal agency. How many of you anyone not familiar with the Corporation for National Service? Oh, okay, a few of you, okay. So Corporation for National Service is a federal agency that provides federal funds for various national service programs. There are different subtitles to it. There's Subtitle C programs, which are the AmeriCorps programs, the VISTA programs, Senior Corps, and then there's Subtitle B programs, which are school-based programs, and those are most of the Learn and Serve America programs, which engage students and young people in service learning activities. Did I get that right? So what happens with the Corporation for National Service is that service learning is seen as a service program as opposed to an educational enterprise. So in K-12, we have the U.S. Department of Education that funds educational programs, but yet the Corporation for National Service funds service learning. So I know in the K-12 world, people say, well, this is a service program. It's not an educational enterprise. And we're starting to see that, and we've seen that in higher education as well. When they were looking at the new funding for national service programs, they were looking at military service, alternative military service. So rather than doing military service for 2 years, you do kind of a civil service for 2 years, a civic service, I should say, for 2 years as an alternative. So it was all lumped together, and I think it gave people the sense that, well, that's not what I want service learning to be about specifically, especially when we look at the educational enterprise and what students do. Okay, in K-12 and higher education, we're engaging students in service. That's different than individuals in service. So students in service means that as a student, we have a responsibility to have an educational experience around that service. That's not to say AmeriCorps is an educational, all these, but that's not an intentional component of it. Where service learning is very intentional. So people get very confused, and when they, I think, hear national service, it says, well, service learning is just service with some reflection. You do your service and you go, oh, yeah, it was really great, and I had a good experience, and that's what people think, which is not what good service learning, at least, or different kind of service learning that we're looking at, like a more academic service learning experience. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to look at you to make you feel like you had to respond.
Yes, and one of the arguments is that if you have community service in the schools or service learning, you won't be serving all students. And then you won't be serving students that are dropouts, students that are homeschooled or go to private schools. And
right.
In some ways, that's not true because the sub-grantees, any private entity or anybody could be involved in that.
CBL, right.
And there's definitely a misconception because President Obama President Obama kept saying, we're going to put community service in the schools. And so they were, like you said, trying to lump everything together and say, well, why do they need service learning?
Right.
If they have community
Right.
service. So you were correct in that.
And the other thing that happens is that if we see it as community service, faculty say, well, have students do it in higher ed. They say, have them do it co-curricularly or extracurricularly. Why do I have to do it in my courses? And so that becomes a thing. The other thing that I've learned over the years is that, and I think educators talk differently about their work. And when we did a study in California of K-12 teachers, and we asked teachers about their service learning experience, I mentioned you a story earlier, but one of the things that came out was the way service learning and non-service learning teachers talked about their work. Non-service learning teachers talked about teaching subjects. I teach math, I teach science, I teach biology. And service learning teachers talked more about teaching kids, teaching students. They kind of had a different language around their work. Not universally, but you heard more of that. It was about that their job was really to connect with the students and to see where the students were and try to engage the students and try to advance the students where, the non-service learning teacher says, I got to cover my curriculum. I've got these units I've got to get through. And it's sort of, it's more about the teaching piece rather than the learning piece almost. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it well. But there's just a difference in the language. And I don't know if it's because service learning does that to the teachers or just the teachers are just naturally that way and then drawn to service learning. I don't know. I can't answer that. But I just found that to be a bit telling.
That's excellent. That was excellent. And I think, as I'm speaking from K-12 educators, and one of my concerns is getting high-quality service learning in the K-12 programs. And now we have a stimulus package. We have AmeriCorps, VistaCorps has all this money, and they came to me and they said, oh, we're going to go out and teach your teachers how to do service learning. And that's really scary because it's now an in thing, but they don't really understand that service learning.
Right, and the poor
So-
community.
And exactly, so I think that's something we need to be aware of too, because we want high quality service learning.
Right.
And so when we're working with these volunteers, they could be a part of service learning, but they're not going to be teaching it. It really has to come from
Right.
the educator, and I think that's something
Right.
that's
Yeah.
very important, especially with all the stimulus money out there. I don't know if any of you have encountered any of that,
Yeah.
but.
Good observation. There's a question in the back there. And while we get the microphone there, I just want to say, part of this is, too, the community's role and how, it's about building partnerships, about connecting with communities. It's not just about sending students out. So we miss that piece, too. It's not just projects in the community, but it's really about changing the way we connect with the community as educational institutions.
What I've learned today are there are two key concepts that seem to need to be stretched. One is content, the idea that content comes from the instructor of a course. In service learning, it appears that students, when they're out engaged in whatever projects they're doing, are generating new content, bringing it back to the classroom, and as Cindy said in the other room, generating new questions for research. So if content could be stretched out into the context of the service learning, that might link up with the faculty who say, I just teach biology, I just teach chemistry. And the other word is reflection. Because I hear reflection, and I would think that that is students doing self-evaluation. And the word evaluation, again, is the responsibility of the instructor to evaluate the students. But if the students are learning to evaluate themselves through service learning, then they're learning a kind of service that any professional does, because we all do self-evaluation. So if we could stretch those two terms out of the domain of the instructor, I think we would make some headway in communicating with faculty who don't feel a connection.
Great observations. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I don't like to use the word reflection. I usually say analysis. I like to use analysis because it is not just not thinking about what you did, but sort of analyzing the situation, how to make it better, what worked, what didn't work. Some evaluation in there as well, but it's really digging a little deeper into the issue, perhaps changing one's thinking about it. I think that's really important. And it's funny, when you say analysis, people, oh, yeah, analysis, yeah, okay, we do that, right? Say reflection, it's more, right. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, you need the mic, Miriam. Sorry.
I've got a teacher voice. I appreciate that you spoke to that, Andy, even though the reflection table was my table. But the question did come up that people think about reflection as, I'm going to write down in my journal what happened, or I'm going to cry over my beer and tell you what happened. Whereas reflection is a very rigorous academic exploration of the issues and the problems and the challenges. I don't know where that...
Yeah, I don't know, I think it might be my microphone.
Is that where it's coming from? So I think maybe I have always thought of reflection as the absolute center of academic service learning, and guided reflection, shared reflection with your partners, with your students, and so forth at every community level. But if we called it analysis, it would get away from that sort of softy, that's something McKenna does, or that's something that you do over in social work. It would get away from that. So maybe the word analysis, Andy, is really a more appropriate way to go, because that's exactly what we're doing when we go down those levels.
Yeah, the problem with analysis, though, I've been reminded, is that it kind of gives you a detached kind of feel. So the community members say, well, we don't want to be analyzed here. It's not about analyzing our situation. But so I don't know what the right term is or the better term is, but I think in some circumstances, we need to be sensitive about these terms because they do resonate differently with different populations. Yes. How much time do we have left, do you think? Just about done? Yeah. Are we just about done? Okay. If there are no final comments, thank you very much. Good luck with all your work. I'm really delighted to see all this great momentum here, and I hope to run into you again at some. And if you're ever in the Twin Cities, please come visit. Yeah, thank you.